separate, and instantly, the minute you do that, you're able to let them have their own issues, and their emotion doesn't become contagious. You don't catch it from them. A lot of you catch anger, you catch depression, you catch anxiety from each other. With good boundaries, you can stay calm, you can stay centered, and you actually have the ability, when you're not engaging in that emotion, to speak into their life. So I'm sitting in my clinical office conducting a marital session, and I typically hear things that sound like this. You ready? The wife will start with something like, "He's just always so critical of me." And before she can get that out of her mouth, her husband will respond with, "Well, I'm critical of her because she never does anything I ask." And before he can finish his sentence, she interrupts him. "Well, I never do anything he asks because he's just so controlling." Before she actually finishes the word controlling, he says, "Well, I'm controlling because you never do anything I ask you to do and you're constantly mad. I'm constantly mad because you're so condescending." And they go back and then forth and back and forth over and over and over again. And guys, this is a classic example of a codependent couple that struggles to take responsibility for their own attitudes, their own actions, their own thoughts, and their own feelings. And instead of allowing the other person to have their emotion, to just have it, the codependent couple feels threatened by their spouse's emotion, and they feel the need to respond with the emotional response of their spouse with their own emotional response. When you have clear boundaries, things go in a very different way. You know where you end and where your partner begins. You know that there's some separation there. You also know that you're not at the mercy of your spouse's behavior or their problems or their hurt or their pain. Boundaries, see, they're really all about you. Let me explain. The authors of, really, it's one of the best-selling Christian books of all time. It's called Boundaries, appropriately enough. It's written by John Townsend and Henry Cloud. They describe boundaries like this. They say, when you build a fence around your yard, you don't build it to figure out the boundaries of your neighbor's yard so you can figure out where his property line is so that you can dictate what he does in his yard. You build it around your own yard so that you can maintain control of what happens to your own property. And that's how personal boundaries work. Exactly the same way. You can't control what happens in your spouse's emotional yard. You can't control how your spouse speaks to you. You just can't. But you can control how you behave when they speak to you in what you perceive as an inappropriate way. For instance, your spouse comes at you, man, they start hammering you, they're calling you names, they're at it again. You have options. Your first option is to have zero boundaries and get right into the mix. Go aggressive on them, win the argument. That's really poor boundaries. That's codependent. The well-boundaried response is you draw a boundary. You can hang up the phone. You can say, "Hey, look, I'm more than happy to have this conversation with you, but in order to do that, we're going to have to take a break for 15 minutes and come back later when we're calmer." That is a good boundary. See, boundaries let you determine what you will and won't tolerate and what you will and won't be exposed to. And you set the consequences. That's the beautiful part about boundaries. You set your limits. I had a couple in counseling. This was awesome. They had knockdown, drag-out fights all the time. You ready? Here's what it was about. Going to church. Can you believe this? The wife was always late for church, and the husband would get so mad. He would yell, he would scream, he would explode. And finally, after many sessions on boundaries, the husband finally decided to stop exploding and to start drawing a healthy boundary with his wife. And here's the boundary that he set. He said, "Look, I'm no longer going to let your tardiness have the power to make me angry ever again. I'm not doing it. You don't have that power. I have a boundary. We're separate. Instead, I'm going to wait patiently for you when you're late. I'm going to be kind and loving. And if I can't, or I feel like I need to go, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to go. I'm going to go to church, and you can follow me there, and when I see you, I'll hug you and kiss you and give you a big hug and tell you that you're great." Now that is a good boundary. And honestly, it was the end of their ongoing battle over her tardiness. So one of the key parts of boundaries is the idea that you are not me. Your spouse is not an extension of you. They are not here exclusively to meet your needs and to do what you think they need to do. That belief system will break down a marriage in a quick minute, because love breaks down when we don't see our spouse as people, but as objects of our own needs. Does that make sense? So when your spouse comes to you and says, I'm struggling because I feel distant from you, and I feel like there's a disconnect between us, if you have good, healthy boundaries, you don't interpret that as an accusation or get defensive. Instead, you're able to kind of listen. You're able to kind of take it in and say, okay, I can hear you and understand you, and I'm not threatened by that. I'm not feeling like you're beating me up or like I have to prove myself. I can just value you for who you are because you have your own emotion and it's not mine. Now, look, I know this is counterintuitive, but understanding boundaries allows you to actually see the other person as separate. And instantly, the minute you do that, you're able to let them have their own issues and their emotion doesn't become contagious. You don't catch it from them. A lot of you catch anger, you catch depression, you catch anxiety from each other. With good boundaries, you can stay calm, you can stay centered, and you actually have the ability, when you're not engaging in that emotion, to speak into their life, to be empathic, to love them through whatever's going on in their life. So demonstrating good boundaries, it is mission critical to a healthy marriage, and it actually allows you to love your spouse more fully and to be the wife or the husband that God has truly called you to be.